And welcome back to an episode of the Clear Your Jets podcast. Where it was Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Michael, a week removed from the draft. Have you recovered? Have you recovered from Joe Douglas's masterpiece?
Not quite, because we're still out here having all these strong reactions to everything we're seeing. I mean, jersey numbers come out and we're absolutely losing our minds analyzing those. You know, we see Sauce Gardner and Breece Hall, my favorite draft pick, in the building, at the practice facility, and just everything is so exciting and there's just so much hype behind it. We say it every single year that we're going to try to manage our expectations, and because we've been through so much, but we're back again. The hype is back. I'm excited, and I can't wait for September to get here. So to answer your question, no, I've not recovered yet.
How much time have you spent watching Breece Hall highlights? And have you officially walked back your kind of initial reaction, which I should point out was not as strong as some of the other reactions we saw from some of the nerds at PFF and some of the other writers on Twitter, where they were criticizing the Jets for trading up to take a running back. You mentioned it. You mentioned that, maybe that's not what we expected to happen. It did seem like you were still really happy with the player and you didn't agree with some of the other stuff that was said on Twitter. But how much have you kind of shifted your opinion of Breece Hall and how you view maybe drafting in the future? Because this is kind of a similar reaction you had to Elijah Moore last year.
Yeah, I mean, last year I had a very similar reaction. I wasn't anticipating Elijah Moore, didn't study him as much as some of the prospects at other positions they could have taken there, such as Owusu Koromoa, the linebacker, Tevin Jenkins, the lineman. And then this year again, I don't think anybody was talking about Breece Hall throughout this process as a potential target for the Jets, but there he is as the pick in round 2. So we really need to, going forward, just make these mock drafts based on the talent and kind of try to avoid creating these preconceived plans of, okay, let's hit either edge or corner or receiver in round 1, then second round, whatever we didn't get. It's best player available is the most realistic path to go if you want to try and predict what's going to happen. So I think I could have been more prepared for it, and then I probably would have been more on board with the initial reaction. I mean, I think I still stand by some of the initial points that I was making. I still think that the expectations are a little bit higher for a running back than if he were a safety, if he were a linebacker. Because when you draft a running back, I think the first running back in the class, high second round pick, and you traded up, very small cost to trade up. But it is a decent investment. And I think you are hoping to get, to use the example again, Jonathan Taylor a couple years ago. I think you're trying to get that kind of player, not just a, good, decent member of your committee. I think you do want to get a star to be worth that investment at a position that isn't quite as valuable as some others. So I do think I maintain the fact that my expectations are pretty high for him, more so than what it would be if it were another position. But now that we know that he was the number 18 player on their board, which Joe Douglas revealed, it definitely makes sense that it was a no-brainer for them to make that pick. I mean, if you're sitting there, you have a top 20 player on the board in the high second round, you think the Texans are going to take him, go ahead and give up a 5th round pick, leap them and go get this guy who supports your quarterback, supports the run game you want to establish. And the quarterback is the most important part of it. Help him out, take pressure off him. So yeah, I've definitely come around on the decision-making process of it. I do think it made a lot of sense. I definitely don't identify with the nerds of Twitter who are kind of ripping this one apart. Like, this is actually bad process by the Jets. You can't give up all the quantity of picks when you're a rebuilding team.
There's a misconception.
So I don't identify with that, but yeah, I've come around.
There's a misconception because you are very into analytics, but I actually do credit you that you are able to think outside of the very narrow box that a lot of those analytics guys put themselves into. And like you said, I mean, the Jet. Do you want to cut in there?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say is I just think the main sort of mantra that you should use regarding analytics is it should be a tool, not a religion. And I think a lot of the analytics people on social media are just extremely rigid, and they kind of operate as if they know everything and just any differing opinion is wrong. And I never try to do that. Like, I try my best to use it as a tool to learn and just analyze better and sort of interpret information in a smarter way, but I'm never going to deny the film and just the context of the thought process in any given situation. The numbers are never the end all be all. It's a useful tool, but to operate like some of those people do, as if it's the only way to make decisions, is it's definitely very closed minded, and I try to stay away from that.
Yeah, context is the thing I think that always gets overlooked
Right.
when you just follow analytics as a religion. Because like you said, I mean, the Jets went into, first of all, this is a monumental draft for Joe Douglas and this entire team. This is the draft they've been building up towards. They walk in with 4 picks in the top 38. And I think I've seen some people act like, oh, well, that's a given that they should get 4 great players. And it's like, go back and look at the Raiders 2019 class. So the Dolphins in 2020 or like 2020, yeah, it was 2021 or I forget exactly. But there's been plenty of great, the Jaguars have been picking in the top 5 for a decade straight. There's been plenty of teams who have high picks that don't hit them, or teams that have multiple first-round picks that don't get a bunch of studs. And again, none of the guys the Jets have drafted have played. Guys could get injured. Guys could not live up to expectations. You don't really know what will exactly happen. But on paper, the Jets had a great draft, and that's undeniable. That's objectively, especially when you look at it, I'm such a believer in Joe Douglas. That doesn't mean that he can do no wrong, but I was pretty confident that whatever they did, I was going to support. I mean, if this season doesn't go that well, maybe I'll be a little bit more questioning of Joe Douglas, but he's made smart move after smart move, especially over the last year and a half, that it's like, he has my faith. I trust him to be able to evaluate these draft picks better than I can. And for him to get, to go into the draft with 2 first-round picks and walk out of there with 4 of your top 18 is absurd. I mean, that's great value. And you could just see it in the war room why they were so excited. And the context of the fact that this is a Jets team that has had 0 offensive weaponry for an entire decade, and you just drafted a rookie quarterback. The last rookie quarterback you drafted, you didn't surround him with any talent. And the goal of this offseason was to just give Zach Wilson 0 excuses. Not that he's making a bunch of excuses, but to leave no doubt about the type of quarterback that you have. Give him a giant safety net to work with. It's like, yeah, score points, have fun. We get to watch Breece Hall highlights for the entire summer. And it's not like they just took any running back. They took the best running back in the class, and a running back who might have been a top 15 pick 5 years ago. Lastly, before we get to our mailbag, the other point, and I've seen this raised, is it's like you can't trade up for a running back. First of all, the second round in particular is the sweet spot for running back. But the trade that the Jets did for Breece Hall is literally the exact same trade that the Colts did for Jonathan Taylor a few years ago. They gave up a fifth, they moved up 3 spots. The Jets gave up a fifth and they moved up 2 spots. Do you think the Colts are regretting at all trading up for Jonathan Taylor? And I've seen some people say, well, they're not the Jets. They had whatever. It's like, do people just are displaying a critical unawareness of the Jets roster. And the fact is the Jets have a good offensive line. With Mekhi Becton, they can have a great offensive line. So it's not like the Jets had all these holes all over the roster. I'm not saying they're proven roster, but they have young investments in a bunch of different positions. So for them to sit in the second round and take, an edge, I've seen people throw about like Ebiketie or Boye Mafe or David Ajabo. It's like, we want to add a 10th edge, because you go look at the Jets edge rushers. That's one of the deepest positions on their roster. Whereas Breece Hall is a guy who's going to touch the ball, second most on the team outside of Zach Wilson in theory. But like trading up for a running back, I mean, it's like the Vikings traded up for Dalvin Cook. The Broncos traded up for Javonte Williams. There's been a bunch of just successful trade ups for running backs. And I think that the sentiment I saw in PFF was like, trade ups usually are only okay for quarterbacks. But I would argue, unless you're Kansas City or maybe San Francisco, who already kind of have established weaponry around you, trading it for a quarterback is actually one of the worst things you can do. And the Jets saw it in 2018. And maybe not the worst things you can do, but it's super hard to develop your young quarterback when you give away all these assets to go and get them. The Jets did it in 2018 and didn't really have the assets to build around Darnold when it came to draft capital. And the draft capital they did have, they used on the defense. And the Bears are facing the same exact thing. They don't have the draft capital to build around Fields. And the capital they did have, they used on defense. So that's where my concern comes with Justin Fields. I love the player, but like we've seen it where these rookie quarterbacks, it's like the biggest variable in their success is how the team builds around them. I'm a firm believer that, you put Josh Allen in a different situation. You put Josh Allen where the Jets drafted Sam Darnold, he's not Josh Allen. And if you put Sam Darnold in Buffalo from day one, maybe he's a little bit better. I'm not saying he turned into Josh Allen, but situation is just so big. So just to wrap up this entire rant, the entire week has bothered me seeing all these PFF nerds talking about trading up for a running back is bad. It's like, all right, you have a fundamental misunderstanding of this Jets roster, and then preaching you can only trade up for a quarterback. It's like been a ton of trade up for quarterbacks that don't work, especially if you're a bad team. So I guess we can get that rant out of the way.
Right, and a couple more thoughts on that before we get into the questions. But I think in terms of the trading up, and like you mentioned, just the context of the Jets roster is important. Because I think in general, like maybe you could make the argument that trading up in general tends to lose value compared to trading down. But the context is important because the Jets are this team that's in this situation now after all the trades they've made the past couple of years. Adams, Darnold, plus many veteran
Leonard
trades.
Williams, Avery
Leonard Williams,
Steve
Avery
McClendon.
Williamson, McClendon, Blake Cashman, Herndon. All these trades have put them into this position that they're in now, to where they can make these moves. And like they're not in this position to where they should take 15 players every year and sign 15 rookie contracts. They did do that last year and sort of supplement the roster with their 9 picks. But now they're in a spot where they can kind of use those picks instead of stockpiling. But instead of stockpiling them, just move up and get higher value talent, less quantity, more quality out of their picks. So they are in a situation to where they can do that because they've already supplemented the back end of the roster last year. And in, I guess 2020, we'll see how it works, but mostly 2021, they did that. And in free agency, they've not really focused on, and they also haven't made any superstar trades in terms of like a Debo, AJ Brown kind of trade. They've mostly focused the cap space on spreading out the roster and filling holes instead of getting the big superstars. So they've really filled out the roster well. They've accumulated assets in the draft. So now they're in this position to where let's trade up for Jermaine Johnson. Let's trade up for Breece Hall a couple spots if we need to, with a 5th round pick that has like a 10% chance of working out. So
less than 10%.
Right,
Go look at
probably less than that.
DJ Bieniemy put out screenshots of the last like 3 years of 5th round picks. Bryce Hall is the best 5th rounder in his class, like by a long shot. And like you might find a Hunter Renfro, but there's like most of those guys, there's like one name you'll recognize in the entire 5th round. And there might be a few other like solid, maybe role players that, you don't know unless you're a fan of that team, but the hit rate on 5th round picks, it's like, what are we doing here? Especially in this class. It's not like this was a particularly strong class. It was maybe a deep class, but I think that's just a nice way of saying there's not really any stars in this class.
Right. Like if you're a team in the first year of a rebuild, I can kind of see that argument. Like maybe you want to stockpile picks, get younger, get a cheaper roster, more shots at the dartboard to start things off. And the Jets did that the first couple of years. A lot of trading down. That's what Douglas was known for. But now he flips it around. They've already, taken those first steps. Let's get more aggressive. Let's get blue chip talent because that's what they really lack. They've done a pretty decent job filling out the depth with this year's free agency, last year's draft. Let's get stars now. And that's what he went ahead and did. When you can make 7 picks and the last one is in the high 4th round and 4 of them are in the top 40, you're in a good spot and you can maneuver and afford to give up some picks. A couple more things about running backs. And to be fair, I'm still fairly low on its value relative to other positions, but I think sort of the narrative has gone out of hand to where it's like running backs they don't not matter. I think they matter less than most other positions, but they do still matter. They don't not matter at all. And the high 2nd round is a good sweet spot to go get one because that's where, you can get the best guy in the class or the 2nd best guy in the class and, not have to pay that 1st round contract and be able to get that value. And you look at the past couple Super Bowl winning teams, the Rams last year, Cam Akers, 2nd round pick. Bucks a couple years ago, Ronald Jones, 2nd round pick. A few years before that, the Patriots, Sony Michel, low 1st round pick. So it has been a position that teams have sort of looked in that in the 30s and the 40s to get that guy and have had success. So I think this is a pick that, again, still I have high expectations for him. For Breece Hall, I would like to see him be a very high level running back to make the pick worth it. But I think he's going to be that. And that's why the Jets made this move. All signs point to him having that potential. I've come around on the pick and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do.
All right, Michael, let's get into this mailbag. We have a ton of questions here, which is to be expected. It's our draft mailbag. So I guess we'll try to fly through these, but there's quite a bit to get through. So let's get underway. So from way out here 18, he says, quarterback aside, where do you think the Jets' current offense ranks? On paper, it looks like it could be a top O-line, a very strong tight end group, a great running back group, and a wide receiver group that could be great. I guess I'll go first here a little bit, Michael. Just I think the key here is on paper. We haven't seen we're banking on a lot of things to happen here. I mean, first of all, you're banking that. Let's just start up front. Outside of Zach Wilson, who we'll get to in a second, Mekhi Becton is probably the single most important player on this team. That's maybe up for debate. You can chew on that if you want, Michael. But I think if Mekhi Becton is healthy and playing at the level he was playing at as a rookie, hell, not even just ignoring any leaps he could make as a veteran, this Jets run game is going to be a lot better. This Zach Wilson's going to have all day to throw. It just changes the vision of this offense. But yeah, on paper, you look at this team. If they can stay healthy, that offensive line is legit. George Fant had a very good season last year. Granted, it was against a relatively easy schedule. We're going to have to see who's playing left tackle, who's playing right tackle. I'm pretty certain they're going to have Becton at right tackle, keep Fant at left tackle since he had the success there, and Becton played right tackle in college. But, it's no sure thing. Becton was, videoed this past week doing sets from, left tackle sets when he's working out. So you never know. And the interior of the Jets offensive line is great too. I'm not the hugest McGovern fan, but he's still an average center and a good scheme fit. But the duo of Tomlinson and AVT, and I love the signing he made this week, and I think there is a question about him later, but Nate Herbig has depth at that position. It's a legitimate offensive line. You mentioned the running backs. We were happy with just Michael Carter and Tevin Coleman, I guess, but we were happy with the type of season Michael Carter had and thought he really had a chance to be a star. I mean, he's definitely a stud, but he has the chance to become a star. When you add a guy like Breece Hall, I mean, that is defenses now have to fear you, and that changes, how they defend you. You're going to see more single high safety looks because they're going to have to bring safeties into the box if they can't stop this run game, and that's going to open up the deep passing attack. And speaking of that, the receivers, I feel like you said, unproven for the most part. I think Corey Davis at this point is underrated. I still think he's a solid, option number 2, veteran wide receiver. Obviously, we love the ceiling with Elijah Moore. Garrett Wilson, I'm very high on, but we'll have to see him in the pros. And then I love what they did at the tight end spot this year. So just, to wrap your question, where do I think it ranks? I think the ceiling for this offense all comes down to Zach Wilson. If we're getting a huge Josh Allen type leap, who, by the way, didn't really make his leap until year 3. He was a lot better in year 2, but he didn't make that monster leap until year 3. But let's just say we get a sizable leap from Zach Wilson. I think it's a top 15 offense for sure. I don't want to get crazy here, but it really does come down to the quarterback, because there's a question here later that we'll get to. I guess I could just ask it in here now because and I'm going to give you time to answer, but I think it ties in well. And it was essentially, I want to give credit to whoever it was, but it was essentially if you replace Zach Wilson with Tom Brady right now, I mean, how much does that change your expectation for this offense? And that was from at T-Bone HU82. I would say you're feeling pretty good about this offensive unit. I'm not saying it's top 5 in the league, but there are many holes here, Michael. So how do you feel about this entire group and the job Joe Douglas has done? And then where do you think it ranks among current offenses?
Right. Well, like you said, definitely it all starts with the quarterback in terms of the ceiling. I mean, you've seen a lot of offenses throughout the years play really well, just being lifted up by the quarterback. I mean, one team that comes to mind when I think of this is the 2015 Panthers. I mean, when Cam Newton has had his incredible MVP season, you look at the team around him, it was really not that much to write home about, but he was just so incredible that year that it was a dominant offense. So the quarterback, it all starts and ends there. So ultimately they'll go as far as Zach Wilson takes them this season. And we should keep our expectations tempered because, like you said, with Josh Allen, year 2, he kind of elevated to an average quarterback after being really bad as a rookie. And then it was year 3 when he became a superstar. So maybe this is just that, moderate leap for Zach Wilson. And it's the next year where he steps up. So we should keep our expectations in check. We should expect, a sizable improvement considering the supporting cast, but maybe it takes him, maybe he has 2 or 3 leaps in his progression instead of just 1. But yeah, looking at the rest of it, this is finally a competent offense on paper. I think we should avoid getting a little too optimistic because there are a lot of talented offenses in the NFL. And this is still a team that's, coming up from the bottom. They weren't the worst offense in the NFL, but they still ranked 28th in scoring. So there is a lot of room for them to grow. But this is, I think you said it, if outside of Zach Wilson, I think you could argue this is a top 15 offense. And there are big swing factors in here. I think the biggest 2 are Becton and Garrett Wilson. If Becton is healthy and if he's the guy that he was as a rookie, but if he can improve on that, because he was 21 years old at the time as a rookie. So if he can build on that and become a top 5 sort of tackle, then man, the O-line could be a top 5 O-line legitimately. And then the receivers, Garrett Wilson is a huge X factor because rookie receivers can be anything. They could be Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, instant superstar. Or they could be John Ross, Laquan Treadwell, Jalen Reagor. So you've no idea what he's going to be. He could be as good as possible or as bad. So if he takes his time to get going, then this will probably be a middle of the road wide receiver group, maybe a little below average. But if he's good to start out, not even great, but if he's just good to complement Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, and then the depth and trickery that Barrios brings, this could be a top half, maybe top 12 to 15 wide receiver unit with the potential to be more depending on what Elijah Moore does and Garrett Wilson himself. So ultimately you look at the tight end depth, receiver depth, and then the O-line, the potential that has. I do think you can argue this is a top half offense on paper outside of the quarterback.
Yeah, and I saw this debate. I think it was DJ was talking about it, but where does this Jets offensive group rank in its own division? And it's right now it's on paper. And you could do the team as a whole. I think behind the Bills, the Patriots right now are not that stacked on paper. Obviously, they have Bill Belichick. They're going to win games. But on paper, between the Jets and Dolphins, I'm sorry, there aren't many other places that I would take the Dolphins over the Jets. And maybe I'm being biased. I think quarterback is a bit of a wash. I think Tua's probably been more consistent. He's proven a little bit more than Zach Wilson has, but I think any Dolphins fan would be lying to themselves if they would say that Zach Wilson doesn't have a much higher ceiling than Tua and is also just entering year 2. So we don't really know what Zach Wilson or Tua is. But at running back, that's an easy Jets win. At tight end, that's an easy Jets win. Offensive line is an easy Jets win. Receiver, you have to give to the Dolphins. I mean, Waddle and Hill is going to be hell, but the Jets aren't no slouch at receiver, as you pointed out. And then defensively, the Dolphins were a much better defense than the Jets were last year. But again, they lose Flores. You don't know how much of a, they could take a step back. I know they kept their defensive coordinator Boyer around, but they did lose Brian Flores. And when you look at that team, it's like, I know we're getting away from offense, but it's like, I would take the Jets defensive line over their defensive line. I would take probably some of the Dolphins linebackers outside of CJ Mosley. I probably feel better about their linebacking core. And then at corner, it's like, all right, Xavier Howard and Byron Jones, again, more proven, but Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, think there is a legitimate chance that the Jets corners can be better than the Dolphins corners this year. I mean, Howard and Byron Jones are getting up there in age. I thought DJ Reed had a better season than Byron Jones last year. And that safeties, I think you have to give to the Dolphins. But anyways, the point being is on paper, this could be the second best team in the division. Will Bill Belichick's all of a sudden start losing games? I'm not going to bet on that. Are you going to bet against the firepower that the Dolphins have at receiver between Hill and Waddle? Maybe not. But I don't think that the Jets are in the cellar of the AFC East. I think there's a legitimate chance that they can really compete to be number 2 in this division. I'm not going to make any claims about the Buffalo Bills, who are probably the best team in football, but even the Dolphins, like they brought in Teron Armstead, and I've seen Dolphins fans shitting on Mekhi Becton. Omar Kelly was talking about how he's a M&M away from 400 pounds. It's like Teron Armstead plays like 8 games a year. So Mekhi Becton, he had some injury issues as a rookie, but he still played in 12. He gets rolled up on week 1, and now he sucks. I don't know. I just feel like we'll answer a lot of questions this year, but this Jets team on paper, at least, is the best that I've seen in the last, probably since 2015. And we'll see on paper or on the field if it comes out to that. From at Big Dogs 1318, I know we said we got to speed through these, and then we just spent like 7 minutes on the first question. So.
Every single time we do one of these, it's the same narrative. It's the same one. We're going to go really quickly. And then 10 minutes later, we get to the next question. But it's good. We provide detail here.
When you have a podcast on a team, you're kind of used to just getting to every single layer of a topic. Whereas like if you had a show on like ESPN, you're talking about like every single other sport. So you can be a little bit more surface level, but like,
right.
I'm just used to, this should be like maybe a 5 minute or like a 3 minute answer. And here we are on question.
Yeah. Somehow a question about where the Jets offense ranks went to talking about the Dolphins' offensive line.
All right. That's my fault. At Big Dogs 1318, when you watch Breece Hall, how would you rank him in this class and compared to the last 4 years of running backs that came out? Do you think him and Carter can be equal to what Carter saw at North Carolina? Were you more impressed with Hall or Elijah Moore tape last year? This is for you, Michael.
I'll start with that last part in terms of Hall or Elijah Moore tape. It's definitely a tough one because when I watched Elijah Moore, I felt like it's kind of hard to answer now, I guess, because what I was going to say was I feel like a lot of the things I saw translated to his rookie year in terms of the route running, how consistently he was winning at all levels of the field. But I guess keeping that out, I think you have to say relative to their position, I think Hall is clearly the better prospect because, we're talking about the number one running back this year, a guy who compares to athletically to Adrian Peterson, Jonathan Taylor. The production is obviously historic. So relative to their position, I'd probably say Breece Hall is better in terms of, giving more the edge based on position. They're probably equal or close, I would say, but relative to their position, I probably would say Hall is the better prospect.
Yeah, I guess I see what you're saying there. How would you rank Hall compared to the last 4 years of the running backs that have come out? I mean, that's Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter. I'm trying to think of other. I mean, Jonathan Taylor came out in 2020. I'd have to go look up the other draft classes, but specifically last year's draft class, I think is a good starting point. Where would you put him in the 2021 class?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because it just feels like, just from all the information that I've done researching and just, watching him, it does feel like he should be in that class of all those elite running backs we've seen recently. But of course, he slips all the way down to 36. So last year, obviously, there was Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams. Those were your early guys until then Trey Sermon, Michael Carter.
Okay, we don't have to worry about any of those guys. He would be in the top three. We know that.
Right. I really do want to say that he's right up there. I'm not even being biased now because he's a Jet, because even before it, like all I would see is, Next Gen Stats does their Twitter account, does really cool research, just kind of combining like their production, their athleticism, and how it ranks historically against other prospects. And all I saw were all these comparisons putting him, with Najee Harris, with Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and all these guys, all these historic running back prospects. So I really do think all signs point to him being in that class, where he's in that conversation for being the number one running back in pretty much any given class the last few years. I just think the running back value has fallen that much to where that's why he was there in the second round. So in terms of last year's class, I guess, what do you think? Would you put him above Najee Harris last year?
I think that. No, I would put Najee Harris above him. I mean, I don't think it's
That's fair. Yeah,
I don't think it's a runaway. I could see Breece Hall having the better career, but I would say Najee Harris probably gets the nod. I mean, and also you also have to factor in level of competition. Not that Breece Hall was going up against a bunch of nobodies, because Iowa State does play good teams, but Najee Harris was in the SEC. He had been doing it for a few years. I mean, so did Breece Hall, but yeah, I would say Najee is probably above him. I would put Breece Hall above Travis Etienne and Javonte Williams, though.
Okay. Year before that was Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor. Where would you put him there?
Well, we know now, Jonathan Taylor is number one out of all of these, but just as prospects, I think he's above Clyde Edwards-Helaire and DeAndre Swift. And at the time, like if I were to go back, I would probably say he was a better prospect than Jonathan Taylor, but Jonathan Taylor's dominating in the NFL, so it seems kind of silly for me to say that. So let's just ignore Jonathan Taylor for now. I mean, if without him, I would definitely put him above Clyde Edwards-Helaire and DeAndre Swift. The point with Breece Hall, just to move things along, is that, yeah, he is an elite running back prospect. I think we didn't really pay too much attention to the running backs, like you said, outside of the later ones, which is maybe where we expected them to take it. But just because he was picked 36 does not mean he was the 36th best player in the draft. I mean, I think 5 years ago, he's a first round pick. 10 years ago, he's a top 15 pick. So yeah, I mean, Leonard Fournette went 4th overall in 2017. It's like you go back to 2017, Breece Hall's in that class, or 2016 when Ezekiel Elliott went 3rd, or 2018 when Saquon went 2nd. I mean, he's up in there. I mean, Saquon had so much hype around him. So did Fournette, and so did Ezekiel Elliott. They played on bigger teams, so maybe they had a little bit more hype. But I still think he would have been a first round pick. From Doggy Boy 4 with two Y's. Two Y's on the boy. Do you think there's a legitimate chance they decide to cut the losses with Zach if he's terrible again this year? It seems there should be little excuses for him. So if he is dreadful, they think they could look for a new quarterback and what looks to be a stacked class next year. First of all, way too early to say. But my inclination would be he would have to be pretty terrible for them to move on from him. I think he gets 3 years. I mean, they moved on from Darnold, but Darnold had played 3 years, and I think some people, the narrative was not that the Jets, Sam Darnold was finished with the Jets. I mean, some people were like, oh, the Jets are moving on from Darnold too quickly. There's a segment of the fan base that wanted to keep Darnold. So you're getting rid of Zach Wilson after 2 years. I think that's premature. I don't see Joe Douglas doing that, considering he's the highest pick he's made. I think they really believe in him. The question would be, and this is getting too far ahead of ourselves, but if he continues to be bad, I think it really comes down to the other rookies, especially the ones drafted this year. If Joe Douglas really hit on this draft class and Michael Carter and Vera Tucker and Elijah Moore are all good, I think he'll get another crack at picking his own quarterback. But it really just comes down to how did the rest of the draft classes perform. I think Joe Douglas has done enough and has set himself up into the position where if these rookies play well, he'll get himself another crack, even if Zach Wilson's bad. But it's just too early to say. I think the Zach Wilson you saw at the end of the season, I think you're going to see that next year. Plus, a little bit more and having more help around him. So I don't think he's going to be dreadful. But Michael, before we move on, any thoughts on that? Do you think there's a chance if Zach is just god awful? I mean, I think he'd have to be like week 2 New England Patriots bad every week for this to be a reality. But do you see any scenario where they could move on from him after this year?
I think the only way I could see it is if he were bad enough to where they were in a spot to where they could get one of these top quarterbacks next year without trading up. Like if they picked first or second, or depending on how deep the class is,
right,
maybe third. And it was all his fault. And it was clear, this is a really good team. We have an infrastructure, although it's hard to pick that high and be a good team. But if he were that bad to where he is single-handedly dragging the whole team down, you could draft whoever comes out next year. Maybe, but it's only 2 years. It would be pretty unprecedented to see a guy given up on that early.
Yeah.
After getting to his second year, because sometimes guys, rose and flamed out after one, but that was an example of circumstances where it could happen. So
right,
it's extremely unlikely, but I guess if you're number one and it's all his fault, then sure. I don't think it's likely,
especially since it's the same general manager and head coach that picked him. They both sound super high on him. And it sounded like if the Jets were picking third, they might have kept Sam Darnold. I mean, it really sounds like, they broke it down. They scouted Zach Wilson versus Sam Darnold. Who would they take? And they said they'd take Zach Wilson, but it didn't sound like it was necessarily a foregone conclusion after the year that Sam Darnold was going to be out of there. Although I was listening to him on, I think it was Taylor Lewan's podcast. And Sam Darnold was talking about the beginning of last year, he was talking with Mike LaFleur. He was going over the scheme. I mean, he said he had a kind of a feeling that he might get traded, but they were going through the motions as if he was going to play. So I don't think it was necessarily a foregone conclusion they were going to get rid of Sam if they picked third. And so to take that to Zach Wilson, they would really have to be in the position, like you said, to where you could make the argument it would be a legitimate upgrade. For Matt McAnally, John, do you think they'd ever play AVT at offensive tackle in a pinch? It's a good question. I think it would really have to be a pretty big pinch. He did play offensive tackle at USC. There was some talk, about him playing offensive tackle in the NFL. It wasn't like when he came out, it wasn't as if he's a guard only. For some teams, if they drafted him, he might have been a right tackle. If the tackle spot gets really bad, I am kind of worried about the depth, and the depth of the interior offensive line's looking good. You want to play Herbig and whatever, I could see him maybe sliding out there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would have to be, if however many backup tackles you have, all of them go out, then I could see it, push him out there, bring in Herbig, play guard. So it is useful to have that versatility as a last result. I don't see it being a primary option though.
All right, from @CD_2K, and this is pretty much the exact inverse of the question that was just asked a moment ago. Fans make or have made all kinds of excuses for Saleh and his staff. I don't believe in doubling down and keeping mistakes for continuity. Zach is a once in a lifetime for the Jets. What does Saleh and his staff need to show to keep their jobs? I think that it's tough. First of all, I disagree with what you're saying here. I don't believe in doubling down and keeping mistakes for continuity. I agree with that. Like if the Jets defense is horrific next year, they have to make some changes. Maybe they fire Jeff Ulbrich. But I don't think you're ever going to really turn something around if you just keep recycling through coaches and management and quarterbacks every 2 years. You really do have to allow these guys time to grow. And I think that Saleh has shown me, he hasn't necessarily proven it, but I can see the vision with him. And so I've watched a decade of terrible Jets football that I have kind of the mindset of like, let's just let Saleh and Joe Douglas put their vision out there and we'll see what it comes out to. We'll see if it works, but I don't think Saleh has done anything to the level of like a guy like Urban Meyer who just got himself fired in a year. Like, I don't think there's much Saleh could do this year to get himself fired. I'm not saying they should just keep trying the same thing over and over again. They might have to fire a few coaches. They might have to make some changes. But yeah, I think this is kind of dumb. And also it's like Zach is a once in a lifetime for the Jets. It's possible that he's not. Like, we don't know that. There are plenty of guys with super high ceilings that just don't pan out. I don't think you could put that all on Saleh if it doesn't work out. So Michael, anything you want to add here?
Well, yeah, I think it's unlikely that there's any firing in terms of Douglas and Saleh this year. Like you said, though, I could see, if the defense really struggles, there could be big changes on that side of the ball. That's definitely legitimate. But I think Saleh is here not necessarily for the defensive side of the ball. It's just the way he manages the roster, the way he speaks to the media, motivates players and creates relationships in a positive culture and all that. That's what he's there to do. And he's doing that really well. And, hopefully that translates to wins. Obviously that's why those things are important. But unless they have an extremely bad season, then I have a hard time seeing him fired, because it's still, they're inheriting a team that had nothing. So it could take a little bit more than 2 years. They might only win 6-7 games this year, maybe somewhere around there.
Don't worry, we're getting to that question.
Right. But I think that should be enough for them to stick around, barring, again, a complete disaster. I think he'll stick around. So in terms of evaluating Saleh this season, I think mainly what you want to see is just a continuation of the positive culture they've had. And I know moral victories only go so far, but it is something that can help in the long run and is a refreshing change versus what this team used to be and what you see other teams around the NFL continue to be. There are a lot of dysfunctional teams in the league that won't win because of those problems. When you look at Washington, when you look at Jacksonville, those teams aren't going to win with the structures they have. It's just not going to happen. And the Jets are not one of those teams right now, regardless of the record on the field. So continuation of that would be great. And then I just think the development of not necessarily the players they drafted this year. I know that's the hype right now, but let's see the guys they drafted last year take steps, the guys they drafted in 2020, the guys returning from injury like Carl Lawson, the development of that talent on the roster. Let's see some of that. So I think those are the two main things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit ridiculous to say Zach is a once in a lifetime for the Jets. I certainly see what he means when it comes to like talent and ceiling. But for me, like if you're going to make that declaration after one season, I would say Saleh is a once in a lifetime for the Jets. And you want to give him every chance to succeed and not straddle him with a bad quarterback if Zach's not performing. I think, like you said, I mean, Saleh's has shown plenty of things to be optimistic about. And in my eyes, I think head coach is more important than quarterback. They're obviously both monumental. And I think Saleh has just earned his chance to try to see his vision through. And their vision isn't just a 2-year plan. Joe Douglas came in and got a 6-year contract for a reason. It was a longer rebuild. That doesn't mean we should be happy with a 3-win season this year, but patience is a virtue, and I think it could pay off for the Jets if they continue to be patient. And I think the patience that they showed the last few years will actually end up starting to pay off this year. That's kind of my mindset, is that I think, they were patient. They started being patient in like 2017, and they've been patient kind of all the way through outside of maybe that 2019 offseason where they splurged for Bell and Mosley. But there's been so many seasons the last few years where it's like, all right, we're not trying to win a Super Bowl yet. And I think we're starting to get to the point where that patience hopefully will have paid off, especially under Douglas. All right, from Matt Verge 001, Jets signed a decent-looking 23-year-old backup interior offensive lineman this week from Philly's waiver wire. He's talking about Nate Herbig. Any other cuts like that you can see happening at tackle, linebacker, interior defensive line, or free safety? Or is there anyone worth signing that's still a free agent at those positions besides Quan Alexander? Michael?
Yeah, well, first of all, in the Herbig signing, I think we should talk about that a little bit. That's a great move. I mean, I've been trying to find a catch as to why this guy's available, and it just seems like he requested a release, wanted a better opportunity. Which, I mean, I guess the Jets aren't the best to get playing time, but this is a guy who's young. He has played all three interior positions in the league. His production is good in both phases in terms of grades, pressure, penalties, all that. So this is a clear upgrade over Greg Van Roten, and they saved cap space to do it. So Jets got clearly better with this move. But looking at some other spots, they can get better. Dion Jones is a guy who's been floated around as a potential cut. Um, I wouldn't trade for him on his contract, and he declined a lot last year. Falcons fans were throwing a lot of criticism at him. If he gets released, sure, bring him in, but not a guy I'm trading for. The linebacker market does still have some good veterans, though. Mostly older players. I mean, that's what you're going to get at this point. But AJ Johnson from the Broncos, sort of a character issue guy, but really good production. KJ Wright, solid connection. Dante Hightower, Anthony Barr, Jets legend, Joe Scobbert. So there are some names out there if you want a competent veteran linebacker. We'll see if they do that, though. I feel like that they like their young talent and want to develop it. So we'll see what happens. But preferably for me, and I know a lot of people would probably agree, it would be good to just have that security blanket of a veteran linebacker. If these guys don't develop, go ahead and throw in a decent veteran starter out there instead of just relying fully on these guys. But we'll see if they actually do that.
Yeah, my biggest concern on this team right now is linebacker. So I definitely think they'll make a move. Kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, I think we passed the point where Joe Douglas wouldn't make a move, and because like in 2020, it was kind of like, all right, why sign this guy, this veteran? You want to get your young guys to play. You're not necessarily tanking, but you're not necessarily trying to win it all. I think Douglas is in the position where he'll do anything he can to make this team a lot better. Linebacker, to me, it's like all it takes is one CJ Mosley injury, and this team is really screwed at that position. And linebackers are just so huge for this defense. So I'd like to see a move there. I mean, it is, remember Quincy Williams was signed at the waiver deadline last year, at the waiver wire cut down last year. And I think that they could probably find a linebacker then if they don't sign a veteran. Maybe they go through training camp, see how their guys are, and then make a signing. But like, I agree with you. I think they should bring in a veteran linebacker before training camp. Offensive tackle is the other spot that I really have any issues. It's just because, again, one Becton injury, and it's like, all right, I guess we're starting Max Mitchell or Chuma Edoga or Connor McDermott. I just feel like I felt a lot better when they had Morgan Moses last year, and it really turned out to pay off because Becton goes down week 1 and Morgan Moses plays pretty much every single game. I think he actually did play all 17 games, unless I'm mistaken. So, yeah, I would say linebacker. And what were you going to say?
Oh, I mean, I was just going to talk about some of the tackles that are available.
Okay, go ahead.
There's Daryl Williams from last year. He was kind of a guy we were talking about, right tackle from the Bills. Sort of like linebacker. There are a lot of veteran, sort of Morgan Moses type players out there. Eric Fisher, Brian Bulaga, Riley Reef, Brandon Shell, actual Jets legend, unlike Anthony Barr, Bobby Massey, Mike Remmers. I'm just rattling off the list here of all the 30 plus tackles that I see. So there is that security. Because I mean, like the interior depth, I think is good with Herbig and Dan Feeney. That's pretty solid for your backup group of interior guys. But tackle right now, obviously they drafted Max Mitchell, but I don't think you expect too much out of him as a rookie. Chuma Edoga is not reliable, and Connor McDermott I like Joe Douglas a lot, but I don't understand the fascination with McDermott. Joe Blewett has this joke that he does all the time in his film breakdowns. Like, he'll be talking about a college edge rusher, and like he'll be going up against a tackle, and Blewett will kind of point out, like, in the NFL, you're not the tackle's not going to be playing like that unless he's Connor McDermott. So like he's not good. So they can improve the depth of this tackle position for sure.
I mean, maybe future tight end for Connor McDermott.
But that is a possibility. This man has never dropped a pass, and you can't take that away from him.
The only other holes that you mentioned, and I would agree with you, would be like run stuffing defensive tackle. I think you might be able to find that in training camp between a Tanzel Smart or a Jonathan Marshall. I think that's somebody you might be able to find on the lower, a younger player. And then safety, it's like it's not amazing, but first of all, you got Whitehead at one spot, and then you like Joyner a lot, who was penciled in to be a starter last year. And then behind that, it's like, all right, you got Ashton Davis entering year 3. I thought Jason Pinnock looked good at times last year. Elijah Riley had his moments. So I'm not too worried about safety. For me, it's linebacker and offensive tackle. I think you'll find your interior defensive lineman, and I don't think you really have to do much at safety. At T-Bone HU82, a lot of talk about win-loss expectations for this year. Hypothetical question. Oh, there it is. Okay, that was a question asked earlier. I don't think you ever answered it. If you just swapped Zach Wilson with Tom Brady, no other changes, what would your win-loss / playoffs expectations be?
I guess I would say 10 wild card, like 9-10 wins is reasonable, because I think with the Bucks, when he went there, like you could have reasonable Super Bowl aspirations, because that's a veteran team. Their defense had plus starters at every position. Their O-line was stacked, and the Jets O-line is stacked too, but we kind of knew that O-line. It had kind of proven itself a little bit already. I guess not quite, because they just got Tristan Wirfs, but I feel like that team's a little more established. And even though they weren't good, I think they won 7 games the year before Brady was there. Jets just won 4. So yeah, a little bit. And also the receivers, a lot more proven. Godwin, Evans,
Gronk.
Gronk was there. So there's definitely more proven veteran talent on that team. Whereas with the Jets, you put Brady on there. Absolutely. You got to go to the playoffs with Tom Brady. And this team, which isn't, not a terrible roster anymore. So I'd just say wild card 9-10 wins would be my reasonable floor if you switch the quarterbacks on. But with Zach Wilson, again, the possibilities are all over the place.
All right, from at Harlem for days, is Clemens the overlooked draft pick? It looks like he's really liked in the building, and he was quote tweeting the quote that Carl Lawson is trying to take him under his wing. He met with him this morning, and it just seems like Lawson either liked what he saw from Clemens. I think Clemens is maybe a little overlooked. Look, it's hard for Max Mitchell and Clemens and even Jeremy Rucker to an extent to get any spotlight, because the Jets basically just drafted 4 first-round picks. So it's like the 4 first-round picks. Really, it's the 3 first-round picks, Breece Hall, and the other guys. Jeremy Rucker just kind of moved himself into because he's going to be a fan favorite. But I think Clemens is getting overlooked for sure. I think he's in a good spot because he's not going to have to play right away. I think he certainly can play, but you look at him, I mean, physically, his arms are insane. I mean, you can see why the Jets drafted him, because not only is he a physical freak of nature, he was also highly productive, and he was a team captain. Yes, the arrests are maybe mildly concerning, but they weren't violent crimes. And so if the Jets did their background on him and they feel confident in him, I like the pick a lot. I think that was good value. Without the arrest, he's a day 2 pick. And he has a few moves in his arsenal. Obviously, he's going to need to add more. That's why I like Carl Lawson, giving him some techniques. His bend isn't amazing, but when you have arms like he does, you don't need it. And especially you put him in this wide 9 system where he's going to be able to rush on those wide angles. I just think it's a great scheme for him. So I'm excited for Clemens, but he's one of those guys where the Jets are getting closer to being back in a normal situation where like a 4th-round rookie isn't relied upon to start immediately, where the last few years it's kind of been like that, where you've had day 3 rookies starting. Max Mitchell and Michael Clemens should not be starting this year. Maybe towards the end of the year with injuries or whatever, if Clemens balls in the preseason, but the expectation for Clemens and Mitchell should be redshirt years.
Yeah, I agree. And like, it was an interesting pick because obviously it's maybe the deepest position in their roster. I mean, Carl Lawson, Jermaine Johnson, Jacob Martin, Bryce Huff, Vinny Curry is in there. So it's got a lot of depth. It's going to be hard to get that playing time. But clearly, when Joe Douglas takes a guy who isn't perfect from a character standpoint, although like you said, not the most serious issues, was still a team captain. But those are things that obviously probably contributed to his slipping down the board. Douglas said it himself. They saw him as a day 1, day 2 borderline talent. So, and maybe that's pumping him up a little bit, but either way, it's clear that they saw the talent as a good value for the draft position. So he's a guy who I probably, barring injuries, wouldn't expect to see much this year, but over the years, as guys sort of phase out, we don't know how long Carl Lawson's going to be here. Vinny Curry, who knows if he'll even make the team this year. Bryce Huff, Jacob Martin, guys who aren't necessarily guaranteed to be here long term, then he could sort of work his way up the depth chart and maybe have a chance to start in a few years. But I think just like Johnson, he's a good scheme fit, a guy who maybe isn't the best finesse rusher. Not that he doesn't have any moves, but the most appealing trait is the explosion and the length, and that's something that plays well in this defense, where he could just explode off the ball and cause some havoc. So it's a good fit for him, and I think this year, best case scenario, he can be a really good situational pass rusher, and they have a trio of guys who I think can do that. And with him, Bryce Huff, and Jacob Martin. So the depth on this defensive line and how fresh they'll be able to keep everyone, which will be helpful for Carl Lawson with his injury questions. It's a really good thing. So I wouldn't have the highest expectations this year, but we'll see over the years if he can sort of phase into a role. Although the one thing that is worth keeping in mind is he is going to be 25 this year. So in terms of the development over the years, maybe not the most growth potential. Maybe he is more of a guy that you want to see producing right away at that age. So that is something to keep in mind. So he's going to have to compete for playing time, but a good scheme fit, and should help keep everyone fresh in this rotation and provide some juice in passing situations.
The one thing that can help him is that he is a bigger defensive end, where it's like, the Jets have Bryce Huff and Jacob Martin behind Carl Lawson, but those guys are kind of the smaller, twitchier pass rushing defensive ends, whereas like Jermaine Johnson, John Franklin Myers, and Michael Clemens are probably your bigger defensive ends, and John Franklin Myers is going to be playing defensive tackle. So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe all it takes is one Jermaine Johnson injury. Michael Clemens is playing meaningful reps for this team. I guess they have Vinny Curry as well. So although he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's probably Jermaine Johnson's backup ahead of Clemens. But it's a deep group, but you're right. Maybe it's not a complete red shirt for Clemens. I hope it's a red shirt for Mitchell, because I don't want to see. I'd rather just Becton and Fant could stay healthy this year. For Matt Shady text, he says, how do you think the wide receivers will be rotated? Last season, there were times all the starters came off at once. Michael, I guess I'll give this one to you first. I mean, you were pushing a little bit earlier in the offseason, the Corey Davis to the slot movement. It seems to have cooled off a little bit. How do you see I think we talked about it a little bit last week, but how do you see the Jets grouping these guys, who plays where, and do guys like Denzel Mims and Braxton Berrios, how often do they get in?
Yeah, well, I think in a 12 heavy offense, like we said last time, just because you're 12 heavy doesn't mean that's what you play the most. It'll probably be 30% of the time, 40 max. 11 is still going to be most common. So 3 wide receivers. I think it's definitely going to be Davis, Wilson, Moore as your 3 starters. And then in those two wide receiver sets, you can mix and match a little bit. Corey Davis gives you more run blocking. But you got to get Elijah Moore out there sometimes too, even if it's a heavier set. So I think it is going to be a little hard for Berrios and Mims to get in there to start out. But, Berrios showed last year what they could do with them in the scheme. So I think they're going to try to find ways to get him out there in certain situations, give Garrett Wilson a rest, give Elijah Moore a rest. So definitely I think Berrios' playing time is going to be pretty low to start out, probably no more than 15-20% of the snaps if everyone's healthy. I guess this would be my prediction to start out. I would say Moore leads the way with 75-80%. Davis probably follows 70-65%. Wilson to start out probably around the same as Davis, maybe a little bit less, 50-60%. And then Berrios will kind of be sprinkled in with his own unique packages here and there, maybe 10-15%.
We'll have to check that math. I think Mims. Do you think Mims has the opportunity?
It's very accurate. It's very accurate math, I promise.
Do you think Mims has the opportunity to carve himself out a role? Because I mean, look, he looks a lot bigger. I will say Joe Douglas has made sure to mention him in the few interviews that I've seen. I guess the ideal scenario would be that he could kind of usurp Corey Davis, and then you're left with Mims, Wilson, and Moore as your young trio. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I think that he really needs to prove it on the field. But do you think there's a chance he could carve himself out a package, a red zone package, or something like that, or maybe take snaps away from Davis?
I'm just gonna I'm optimistic about a lot of stuff right now. A lot of stuff.
That's true.
This is the one thing I'm just gonna sit back and watch it happen. I'm not gonna get my hopes up too much with Denzel Mims. If whatever he does, if he catches one pass this season, I'll be very happy about that. This is the one thing I'm gonna keep my expectations tempered, because last year was very rough. So I'm gonna keep my expectations low and just enjoy whatever he can bring.
From at Photovaser, I don't know if I pronounced that right. I know JJ had a mediocre pass rush win rate. PFF had a stat that on one-on-ones his win rate was more impressive and that he got chipped/doubled a lot because FSU's lack of talent. Any evidence of this in the film? We didn't even have to go to the film. FSU was awful last year. And I said the same point to Michael. Like, I think even before the Jets drafted him, we were talking about his bad, some of his bad numbers and stuff. And I said, well, look, I mean, it is a little easier to have higher pressure numbers when you're on Georgia with a bunch of other stars. When you're at FSU and you were the only guy on that defensive line, which Jermaine Johnson was the only guy on that defensive line, yeah, you're getting doubles. Your teammates aren't creating pressures, so there's less opportunities for sacks. Quarterback getting rid of the ball quicker. The corners are getting burned. There's less time to get after the quarterback. I mean, FSU being awful definitely does impact some of those numbers. But Michael, I mean, you still do have some concerns about some of the numbers behind Jermaine, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something you should keep in mind, because I think with any concern of your own team's draft prospects, you should be honest with them, because if the Dolphins drafted him, then you would point it out as, oh, look at this. This is why he's not that good. But now because he's on the Jets, we have to make excuses for it. But no, I think, like you said, the lack of talent around him at Florida State, definitely worth mentioning, because this guy's the defensive player of the year in the ACC, was a legitimately great player, and they were still a bottom half scoring defense among FBS teams. And he was by far the highest graded player on the team. He was the only Florida State player drafted this year, offense or defense or special teams. So he did not have a lot around him. And that definitely played a role in the possible lack of consistency with his pass rush. But at the same time, I think there's definitely legitimacy to it. You look at Joe Blewett's film review, that's probably the most honest Jermaine Johnson film review out there. And it points out a lot of the issues in his pass rush plan. Like, sometimes he'll just come in and try to win with sheer athleticism, and he'll just get run up the arc. Sometimes he rushes high, doesn't get as low into his bull rush as he could. And there's an interview I saw with him where he was really honest about some of these weaknesses. I think it was with CBS at the Combine. But he talked about it. He said, sometimes I just rely on my athleticism. I'm paraphrasing, but basically said he relies sometimes too much on his tools, just trying to overwhelm guys that he knows he's better than, and that he could sharpen his pass rush plan and his technique and things like that. So if he can do that, and especially being with Carl Lawson and Vinny Curry, all these veterans he can learn from, he can become more consistent. So I do think there is legitimacy to the win rate concerns with him, especially how far behind he was. Karlaftis, Hutchinson, and Thibodeau, those guys were elite in terms of win rate in college, whereas he was about average for a college edge rusher, which obviously isn't great projecting to the next level. So I think there's legitimacy to it, and he does have to improve, but you can also, I think it is legitimate to kind of cut him some slack for the lack of talent around him. But I think ultimately, he's going to be a good run defender. I think he's going to make big plays in the passing game with that athleticism and explosion and the motor he has as well. He's going to get some sacks, and I think we'll get some strip sacks. He'll make those big plays, but can he be consistently dominant enough? Can he get into the backfield as frequently and cause as much havoc and, nightmares for opposing O-lines as star edge rushers do in the NFL, like Carl Lawson could, like your Joey Bosa's, your Khalil Max, Chandler Jones, TJ Watts. Like, those guys don't only make the big plays, but they're constantly in the backfield creating pressure. And that's how you become a star edge rusher. So I do think there legitimately is some improvement he has to do. And his win rate is a little bit, probably a big reason why he slipped. But at the same time, I think, there are other traits he brings to the table that are good. And I think you can, cut him some slack for the team that he played with.
All right, from Matt J Risk 127, where would Sauce stack up against the top corners drafted over the past few years? While you were answering that, Michael, I was getting the list together. The top guys that he's competing against here are J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain. I guess you throw Derek Stingley in there as well. 2020, Jeff Okuda. I don't think 2019. Let me look at it real quick, but I'm pretty sure 2019 didn't have a top guy. And then 2018, if you want to go back that back, is Denzel Ward. So I guess the real contenders there are Surtain, Horn, Ward, and Jeff Okudah, I guess. Where would you rank Sauce among those guys, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, I definitely didn't. I mean, obviously, I had a general awareness of these guys, but I didn't study any of them as closely as Gardner because they weren't really Jets options. But I think Okuda was definitely a very highly regarded and a clear top 3, top 4 pick throughout the entirety of that process. So obviously, he has not panned out well at all, partially due to injuries. But I think he's probably close to what Okuda was. Ramsey was obviously a few years earlier than that, but he was very, very highly regarded. But I think he was better. I think Gardner's better than anyone from last year's class. JC Horn, Surtain, great prospects, but I think that's just a testament to how good Gardner is. I mean, the only knock on his resume is the school he played at, which isn't even a huge concern considering they were good enough to get to the college football playoff. And then when they were there, he was up to the competition against now first round pick and Jameson Williams. So his resume is very, very spotless. And I think he is right up there in the conversation with pretty much any cornerback in recent memory.
Yeah, prospect wise, I think he's the best corner prospect since Jalen Ramsey. Do you think that's too hyperbolic? I would have said that before he was a Jet.
I think that's fair. Yeah,
that before
we were saying that. I think you could listen to our episodes and we'll be pretty honest about that. You won't hear me praising Breece Hall like I did in this episode, but you will hear the Sauce Gardner praise.
Yeah, Sauce Gardner is a very easy player to love. I mean, you could just see it on the film. You could see it with the fact that he allowed 0 touchdowns. The analytics are there. The measurables are there. The mentality's there. I mean, everything is there with Sauce Gardner. Like you said it, Michael, except maybe the school, but it's still like he still went up against arguably the best receiver in the nation in Jameson Williams, and he had a great game against him. So I would say, yeah, he's probably the best prospect since Jalen Ramsey. And hell, I mean, look, if Jalen Ramsey didn't turn into this amazing corner in the NFL, maybe I would have a different opinion. I'm sure, like you said, Jeff Okudah hasn't had a great NFL career, so maybe I'm overlooking him. But it's like, yeah, I would say Sauce is a better corner prospect than Stingley, especially the Stingley that came out this year. Maybe Stingley came out 2 years ago, then maybe. Better corner prospect than Horn, Surtain. And then Denzel Ward, it's like, I think he's a better prospect than him, who went 4th. But again, that was maybe not a huge surprise, but I think some people were like, oh, Denzel Ward went 4th, where it's like Sauce Gardner, when people really got into it, especially the closer we got to the draft, you're like, oh, this guy's, definitely not making it out of the top 10, but this is a guy who could be a top 3 pick. And like to the point where I felt lucky then when he was on the clock when the Jets were picking at 4. For Matt, only Jets won. Would the Jets be playoff contenders in the NFC? What about JJ makes him a better prospect in the second round edges? Mafe, Jackson, Ebiketie, Bonito, Ajabo. And then who would you have taken with the 5th round picks we gave up? All right, there's 3 questions right there. Let's start. Would the Jets be playoff contenders in the NFC? Yes or no? We'll try to hurry this up. I would say contenders is a strong word. I would say they would have a chance at playoffs in the NFC, where it's like it's very hard to see them making the playoffs in the AFC this year. Could they? Maybe, but their chances would be a lot higher in the NFC. And that's not my goal. My goal, honestly, is just finish second place in the division. I think that is shooting high, but still relative. I think that's fairly realistic, but still like a top shelf goal for this team. What about Jermaine Johnson makes him a better prospect in the second round edges? Michael, you laid some of the stuff out when you were talking about him. His tape this year, like you pointed out some of the holes in it, but his tape this year was still top notch. It's not like this is just some bum off the street with bad pressure numbers and he's 22 or whatever. There was a reason Jermaine Johnson was talked about as a top 10 pick. I really like what he showed on tape. I think he is a very clear gap between him and those other guys, Mafe and Jackson, Ebiketie and Bonito and Ajabo. But Michael, if you really want to get down to it, what do you think is the main separator for Johnson other than those guys? Is it just his numbers? Was it his performance at the Senior Bowl? What really do you think was the difference between him and that second group right there?
Well, I think first of all, some of those guys have injury questions, and that definitely played a part in that. Specifically, Ojabo. I think Jets wise, I think scheme fit is part of it. I think he's a really good scheme fit, and some of these other players like Ojabo again, Bonito are more a little bit smaller, more so 3-4 outside linebacker type players. So I think that's a part of it. The run defense and the floor raising, I think you get from that is huge. The potential that comes with his athleticism that he showed in testing, which some of these other players do have as well. But I think there's a really good package, and there is, in terms of the pass rush upside, the win rate, things like that. Legitimate question. And some of these guys did have higher win rates, do maybe have a little bit more complete of a pass rush package coming into the league. But I think the completeness of Johnson, the size, length, run defense, his motor, I think off field, he's really good in terms of personality and leadership, stuff like that. Senior Bowl obviously was a big boost for him. So I think I think the completeness of his profile is what sort of puts him above some of these other guys.
All right. And then the last one he said, who would you have taken in the fifth, or who would you have taken with a fifth round pick to give him? I have no freaking clue. And I think if we learn kind of what we were talking, kind of what we were talking at the beginning of the episode, where we get into the habit every year, and it's okay to do this in round one, but once you get to round 2 and beyond, especially day 3, in the mock drafts all look like, all right, need. And it's just oftentimes the board doesn't fall like that. So who they've taken in the 5th round, I have no idea. I'm pretty sure every position could have been on the board outside of quarterback. I could have seen them taking another receiver, even though maybe they don't necessarily need it. I could have seen them taking another corner, a safety, a linebacker. Who knows? But I'll say this: I'm happy with Jermaine Johnson and Breece Hall instead of those 5th round picks.
Right. Can I get at the NFC question?
Oh, did you not answer that? My bad. Sorry. My bad. I don't think I did ask you. Would the Jets be playoff contenders in the NFC, Michael?
Yeah, I do think so. Not necessarily title contenders, but they would definitely have a more clear wild card shot out there. I mean, who are they competing with in the NFC right now? It's very thin. I definitely think you could argue they'd be one of the 7 best teams in the NFC. There's a huge imbalance leaning towards the AFC right now, which is tough for the Jets in terms of competing for a spot this year. But if they're in the NFC, I would hope for them to maybe win 9 games, get a wild card, which is why I think, you look at their schedule, they've got to do some work with those 5 NFC games between the NFC North and Seattle. I think they have a shot to win 3 or 4 of those. So I think you want to, that's where they're going to get some victories.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if that's what cost them the playoff spot, is that their AFC record maybe wasn't as good, but they went, 4-1 in their NFC games. I think you can be happy with that. I think that's a really good point you raise. Is that, regardless of whether or not they would compete in the NFC, take care of business with those NFC games, because every other team looks at the Jets on their schedule as a W. Every other fan base will mark the Jets as a W, and the Jets have to do a job. Their job this season is to change that narrative and start to establish themselves as not in the cellar of NFL teams. From at Boap01, wouldn't it be cool if Mims is good? It would be very cool. It'd be very cool if Mims is good. I mean, it could, replace Corey Davis and give Zach that jump ball threat. He's looking big. Joe Douglas said he's been phenomenal this offseason. We'll see. There's some buzz around him. I like that there's some buzz building around him, but we'll see. I'll put it this way. If he's wide receiver number 5, he'll get an opportunity. The ship is not sailed on Denzel Mims. Somebody will get hurt. And even not, I think he'll get his opportunity. Wide receiver 5 will play, especially when November comes around. So he'll have another shot, as his career is not over. The boat didn't pass him by. So we'll learn who Denzel Mims is this season. You almost got an up close and personal look at how much he's improved physically this offseason. He was in your area. You almost got to see him up close. Yeah. Should we explore the story? I think it'd be interesting. We touched on it a little bit. They were the high school that the Jets went to go work out when they were in Arizona. It was like 5 minutes away from my house, 10 minutes away from my house. So I was trespassing on some high school property, trying to get a look. And I will say the only thing I found out a few days later from somebody who actually worked at the school, whatever, that they've been going early in the morning. So I guess that if that changes anything, I kind of liked that, because I think I showed up, I would have like 9 in the morning, and apparently they were there at like 6:30, 7 in the morning. Part of it's to beat the heat, but I guess it's a good sign that they weren't all out partying and drinking till 3 in the morning, and then, going at 2 in the afternoon and filming a few practice reps and then posting that to build hype. But like they were there early working. So I guess that is something to take into.
There you go. Good journalism.
Yeah, but no, we couldn't necessarily,
I was doing my best to guide you where to go. I was kind of like the mastermind behind the screen. I was like trying to see the directions.
If we really want to get into it, we did call the school. I pretended to be an NFL agent and said that I had players who were looking to work out. Is the field available? And I kind of mentioned, I know there have been some other players in the field. Are they still there? Type of thing, just to see what they would say. But I didn't really get a direct response. They did call me back, but they were like, oh yeah, you can use our field. And I was like, ship has sailed. All right. From Matt Herschel Parker, our biggest issue, what can the Jets do? What do you think is being done to minimize injuries? Is there a turf problem? Who's accountable? Hey, the numbers are there. The science is there that a grass field is definitely better than a turf field. But I don't know if the Jets just put in that turf in 2020. So I don't know if they're too keen on changing it. It's also, you got to water it and get it in there and to upkeep it. And, like grass, it's not like grass is a perfect solution. I mean, especially if you're in a bad climate. I'm not saying there aren't, I think Pittsburgh is a grass field or whatever. Those grass fields can take a beating. So I think turf is in the long run a little cheaper, which is why they go for it. And it looks good and whatnot. But yeah, the numbers have come out on those knee and ligament issues that turf is not great. Maybe at the very least. And I think their practice facilities are grass fields. Am I outside of the indoor one? I'm pretty sure. I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I'm pretty sure their practice fields are grass. And it's like the Jets have had a lot of practice injuries and stuff. So I think this was my theory that I raised to Michael before this podcast. We didn't have a conclusion on this. I said, do you think part of the reason that the Jets have had so many injuries that the past few years is because they've been so bad? And he was like, well, what do you mean by that? And I just meant, I think a lot of injuries are flukes. Like Carl Lawson, that had nothing to do with how good the Jets were. But it's like, all right, well, when you're a worse team, your quarterback takes more hits. Your offensive linemen are getting pancaked and they can get rolled up into other offensive linemen, like what we saw with GVR and Becton at the beginning of the year. Theory, you might avoid more tackles or break more tackles or, we talked about your defense isn't on the field as much if your offense is able to cook. And we had we ran through, Michael raised some counter arguments and stuff to that. But maybe youth and inexperience and a lower quality of play has led to some more injuries. Maybe that's a working theory. There's no real data behind that outside of the Jets and Lions were two of the top three teams on the most injured teams last year. And they were like the two youngest and inexperienced teams. I had a whole set of reasonings, but Michael, do you think apparently they're doing even more work this offseason to try to prevent it? I mean, the rookies aren't even doing anything at rookie minicamp, the head ones. So any thoughts on the injury issues outside of just knocking wood?
I mean, I saw a quote from Saleh where he kind of feels like he's scarred from when he was with Jacksonville and Dante Fowler had a major injury in this part of the offseason. So it's good to see some caution there. It's not like there's any big time learning to be done right now. So it's good to see some caution. In terms of your theory, I mean, I think there's some credence to it because I think in a lot of football, like when you perform poorly or lose a rep, it like more pain and more physicality kind of comes with it,
there's less technique. Like it gets a little sloppier. If your guys are tired, it gets a little sloppy.
Right, exactly. Like if you're not performing well, it kind of increases the injury risk too. Like if your footwork isn't good, or again, like the obvious example is O-line gets beat, quarterback gets hit, running back gets hit, stuff like that. You miss a block, the receiver gets hit. You make a bad throw, the receiver gets hit. So there is some credence to that, I think. I guess the correlation isn't necessarily there because sometimes there are good teams that get injured. But there is something to that. I guess maybe playing better could help them stay healthier. But I don't know. It is an odd phenomenon. So I guess you could do as much as you can, but sometimes it is just down to luck, which is an annoying part of the sport. But it's good to see at least they're, trying to take some extra caution and do the most that they can to tilt the odds in their favor because it's hurt them a lot. I think it cost them, I would say 2 wins last year, as injured as they were. And obviously that can be the difference between, being a playoff team and being at home.
That's true for as much of as a letdown as last year felt at times. If Carl Lawson was healthy, I think that's a good point. Well, injuries as a whole, I think that's true. We kind of said, maybe this is probably a 6 or 7 win team. This is one of the worst teams of all time. Last year, we're talking about 2020. And we probably said, hey, if they win 6 or 7 games, we're happy. They ended up winning 4, but like you said, the injuries knocked that down. You don't always account for that. So when we get to this next question at 1N Dennis, what is your realistic record prediction for the season? 1, way too early. 2, we have the schedule coming out next week. We'll have a podcast coming out next Friday. I'm sure that question will get asked. So maybe let's hold off on that answer for now, Michael, but we did see your question, Dennis. But maybe we should take into account that if this is I don't want to give any firm numbers. Let's say this is a team that can win 8 games. If they get injured, maybe they're only a 6-win team. Or if there's a game we see can win 9 games, maybe you should factor in that they could lose a game or 2 more than you're expecting. But yeah, it does seem like you look around the NFL, it's like, all right, there are a lot of teams that maybe, like, you look at the Bills, like, okay, they lost Tre'Davious White. That was a big letdown for them. And obviously that was one of the biggest injuries of the year last year, but it's still like, all right, Josh Allen doesn't miss any time. Maybe it's just because he's bigger, but it's like those linebackers, those safeties, Stephon Diggs, like none of those guys ever go down. I'm not trying to knock on wood for those guys. I'm not trying to wish for anybody to get injured, but like, it does seem like the Jets, it's like every single player at least misses a few games every single year. It's like they never have everything at the same time, I think, is the biggest frustration. It's one thing to have injuries, but like when you get your 3 starting receivers on the field together for a grand total of like 11 minutes the entire season, you kind of feel this way where it's like, all right, I guess Corey Davis is healthy now, but I'd like to see him healthy when Elijah Moore's healthy. And when those 2 guys are healthy, where the hell is Zach Wilson? Or, where's Michael Carter, James? It just seems like they're just never all healthy at the same time, even at the beginning of the season, which sucks. All right, I have 2. No more. Well, actually, you have 1, and then I had 1. I guess we'll start with yours. The mini camp rookie jersey numbers. This is, again, there's probably a more important question coming up after this, but figure we get to this one first. Some ugly ones in there. How would you rank them? Because they gave Breece Hall number 35. I have to be honest. If he doesn't change that, he's going to bust. So he needs to change that number. I think Christian Okoye is the only legitimate 35 in the entire history of the NFL. Go find me another good 35. They don't exist. So hopefully, it does sound like Sauce Gardner is going to change from 20. So maybe then Breece Hall can go to 20. But how would you rank them? What are your thoughts on the jersey number? There's a segment of this fan base that doesn't give a shit about this, but there's definitely a segment of the fan base that does care about this. The aesthetic does matter, Michael.
That's why we save it for the end. This is where we get in our get off our need to discuss aesthetic things with the Jets, whether it's jersey numbers or the jerseys themselves, the helmets, logo. This is end of the podcast is dedicated to fashion. So if that's not your thing, too bad. We're talking about numbers. All right. So when these came out, definitely had a negative reaction initially. And I think that mostly it holds for a couple of them. Start off with Gardner, acceptable number if he sticks with it, but it does seem like he is going to change. He said it was kind of likely, stay tuned. So it seems like it's going to happen. I want to see him single digit. I think as a slender corner, single digit makes a lot of sense. Also, I'd like to propose a new rule. No more single digit numbers for kickers and punters. Now that it's allowed for other positions, it's too cool for kickers and punters. You get your random numbers. Be 65. That's what you get. All right. So that's my rule proposal. But yeah, I think 4 available. I think maybe some random player had it.
Yeah, I think maybe one of those kickers or something. I don't know exactly, but I know like Tariq Black still has 3. Tariq Black has 3.
Right.
There are a few numbers that are taken. Yeah, but I agree with that. Bump. I think Joe Flacco wearing 19 is perfect. He's the perfect player you can waste an ugly number on.
Exactly.
So like Mike White, sorry. I know I don't see Mike White moving from number 5, even though I want to give it to Garrett Wilson, because now that he had that game against Cincinnati, like there's a good chance
in the Hall of Fame.
There's a good chance that will be the highlight of his entire career. And in fact, even if he becomes a starter elsewhere, that might still be the highlight of his entire career. So maybe he doesn't want to change from it. He had good luck with it. People bought some Mike White jerseys. I don't know if he's going to change, but like I would say Mike White, you move to 14, back to your college number. Joe Flacco, you can stay at 19, the ugliest quarterback number known to mankind. Braden Mann, I'm sorry, 49. I think punters in the 40s are good, by the way. I think it makes them look bigger.
It's not bad. Yeah, it does give them more beef. A little more intimidating when you see that. Maybe it takes the returner a little bit. They don't immediately process that it's a punter or a
Right. It
kicker.
could be a
They're
linebacker
like,
or a long snapper.
oh,
Exactly.
I could take this guy. And then, like, boom, he gives you a shot to your knees
That's what
and your touchdown is no more. So it
that's
does have strategic elements to
that's what I'm
it.
saying. What do you think about Jermaine Johnson and Hitman Harris's number? He's wearing 52. You like it?
I think it's solid. I do think I kind of wanted to see him. I know Vinny Curry is 99, but I like that. I like
I would have
um
gone 55.
yeah, I
Hamilcar.
feel like 50s is more fitting for like speedy edge rushers. 90s is a little more of a D tackle number though. 11 keeping 11 would have been cool. I don't think edge rusher or defensive linemen are allowed to be in the teens. They can only be single digits. 52 is solid though if he sticks with it. Garrett Wilson 17. I can go with that one. I think I'm definitely cool with that. Pretty solid number, I think, for him. But
I'd rather
like,
him wear 3. I want him in 3.
yeah, I would prefer single digit, but out of these, I think 17, or at least out of the main guys, 17, probably my favorite. I do like it for him. It's my personal go-to number because of my birthday, October 17th. So for I think he's worthy of holding that number
The
more so
Braylon
than
Edwards.
Sharon Peak and Vincent Smith.
Hey, don't slander Braylon Edwards like that.
Right. He would be the first one since Braylon Edwards to
Right. There you
kind of be worthy of holding it. But of course, the big topic here is Breece Hall and that
go. Oh.
absolute monstrosity of a 35. So your thoughts on that and your suggestion for what he
Burn
should
it.
switch to.
They could put Joe Flacco in that number. 35 is not a Breece Hall number. 35. Breece Hall should be in 20. He could be in 3.
Yep.
He could be in 22 when they cut LaMichael Pirine. At 35, hell, even 25, I'm not a huge fan of. I think 20 is a great number for Breece Hall. That's kind of what I'm cheering for. 28 was retired for Curtis Martin. He's got to find a new number. Just put him on 20 or put him in a single digit. Like hell, if he puts on 7 or 9, which I know they retired for mini camp, but one of those numbers in the single digits I wouldn't mind for Breece Hall. But 35, if he goes into the season with 35, I will agree with all the PFF nerds that said he'll suck. Because they will absolutely be right if he's wearing 35. All right. Last thing, very quickly, Michael, before we get out of here, I know we're almost at I think we're like an hour and 20 minutes here. Schedule comes out next Thursday. So we'll do a podcast Thursday night. That'll come out Friday morning. We'll be doing a whole dive into it because we'll have nothing else to talk about, but it's always fun. We'll talk about primetime games and, and you can start to picture the season, but also like your schedule does matter in the sense that like, it seems like you said this to me that last year, actually, when looking back on it, playing Carolina, New England, and Denver wasn't actually a horrible stretch. Tennessee and Atlanta wasn't actually a horrible stretch. Obviously, Tennessee was the 1 seed, but the first 3 in particular really got out to strong starts this season. You forget that Carolina started 3-0, Denver started 3-0. I think New England started 3-0. So it felt a lot harder at the time than it ultimately is looking back. But it does seem like the last few years, the Jets have really had a hard slate to start their schedule. I think part of that is because, the NFL wants good teams playing good teams in December when you get closer to the playoffs, and they want those matchups that are going to determine seeding and whatnot. And, you don't want to have the 13-2 Baltimore Ravens playing the Jets, week 16. That's not always the case. Like the Jets played the Bucs in week 17. It's not always the case, but I do feel like maybe that's part of the reason the Jets schedules have been so hard at the beginning of the year is give a good team a bad team at the beginning of the season, let them get their confidence, not have to waste a good matchup in September. Maybe I'm wrong on that, just like my injury theory. But here's my question to you. What are some things that you'll be cheering for during the schedule release? Like, what are some things positives that you'll be looking to hopefully see, or things that you'll be happy if you see next week?
I think one thing we can all agree on that actually has some logic to it is I think Cleveland early in the season, because of the potential of a Deshaun Watson suspension. I think that'd be big just in case that does come through. I think it obviously makes Cleveland a much worse team. So I think that would certainly be helpful. It kind of reminds me of 2016, I think it was, when Brady had the Deflategate suspension. We thought we were going to miss him, and then it changed and they didn't. So that was a bummer, but or I forget what it was. I think they were going to play him in his return game, and then they shortened the suspension. I forget what it was, but yeah, Cleveland early in the season would be nice. I've a couple other things on my wish list. I would like to see a pretty soft, relatively soft start to the season, just to get off to a good start.
Yeah,
Be able to.
we can't. Our season can't be over by October.
Right.
It's like, can we just be like 2-3, 3-5,
Exactly.
4-6, like just around even though you're not amazing, but like you're still in it. Like once you're 1-7, like
yeah,
or like
I don't want to be in evaluation mode in October this year. That's all I ask. Yeah. Not the highest expectation. I'm not asking for too much. Just give me that.
Any
just
others?
Give me that. Yeah. So in addition to that, I think a home primetime game against a winnable team, because I think that's an opportunity for some fun. Have one of those games on primetime and everyone sees the Jets win, like 2017 against the Bills. That kind of game is a lot of fun. So I would like, the Bears, the Lions, the Jaguars, give us one of those teams at home on primetime. Let's have a fun game. They don't even have to blow them out, because these teams, they've talent too. They probably see the Jets as a win. So play one of those teams at home.
Every fan base, go to any other pod about any
team.
Other team. They'll go Jets win. Everyone.
Give us a home game against an easy team like the Jets. Like that. That's a game you should win.
That's fine. That's fine. That perception is that perception is going to change this year. That's my prediction. But who do you want week 1? Is there any team in particular you're eyeing for week 1?
I mean, Miami comes to mind immediately, but it's like a high ceiling, low floor kind of matchup, because if you win immediately, get that leg up, erase all the talk of the offseason with Hill and everything. But if you lose, it kind of is just more salt in the wound.
Yeah, it's kind of like Carolina.
Let's just start easy. Let's just start easy. Give me Detroit at home.
I could see that. I think the NFL likes to go for storylines week 1, try to find 16 different storylines.
Yeah.
Miami would be very similar to Carolina last year, not as much, but in the sense that you're right, there is a bit of high drama week 1 where it's like, oh, if you lose it, not that it sets the standard for the rest of the season. As we saw, Sam Darnold he actually didn't look that good in that game, but Sam Darnold got off to a good start in the season, then he all fell apart, and you don't really know, but up until that point, week 1 always feels so massive. So if there's a big emotional investment, like, the Jets playing the Dolphins, both teams have had good off seasons, who is going to try to ascend to beat, to go up there with the Patriots and the Bills, and they lose that, you're right. But if they win that, it's wind underneath your sails for the rest of the season. I would say I want either I want a home game week 1. We haven't had it the last few years. I think it's like 4 of the last 5 we've been on the road. So home game week 1, please. And I want a winnable game. So like the Jags at home, I think there's a storyline there. You got Trevor versus Zach Wilson, that easy money right there. Or the Dolphins. I would love the Dolphins. Maybe here's best of both worlds. Open up home game, hope opener against the Jags. Then whatever you have, weeks 2 but when you get to like week 3 or week 4, a Monday Night Football or a Thursday Night Football home primetime game against the Dolphins early in the season would be awesome. That would be nice. The stealth black uniforms. Because I want the matchup with the Dolphins kind of early in the year to really kind of have that battle. But you're right, week 1 maybe you want a little bit of a softer matchup in the Jaguars, the Lions, or something like that. But again, we will be back next Friday.
Actually, before let me throw in one more wish.
Okay.
This is a little ambitious, but
Sunday night?
I think I want to see. No, I'm not that crazy, but we're not there yet. But I would like to see. I want to see them get one of those late in the season road primetime games against a good team. Usually these are big blowouts for the Jets. The Ravens, 2019. They've had a few other. That is the main one I could think of.
They had the Cowboys at the end of 2015. They had in 2016. They had
2016 though, wasn't late in the season, but Arizona big blowout on prime time. And then
so wait, let me get this straight. So you want a home prime time against an easy team, and then early in the season, and then you want and then you want a late season road game against a good team.
Yes, mid to late, like Colts last year. There's another example. There were some of these I didn't have them at the top of my brain, but Ravens 2019, Colts last year, because I want them to have this chance to they don't even have to win this game, but just be competent. Because how many times do we see them?
I get what you're saying. It's like the yearly Super Bowl for us.
Right. Like how many times do we see this pointless primetime game where it's just an immediate blowout? You're like sitting here, why am I watching this for 2.5 hours? Like, let's go play a real team in the spotlight with stakes and play them strong. And I know we don't want moral victories anymore. Maybe go beat them, but just play them good. That's what I want to see.
Okay,
so
I want them
to have that opportunity late in the season, in addition to playing one at home.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us. You can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter, Michael _Nania, myself at Ben W. Blessington. Go to jetsxfactor.com for the best place to go for Jets content. As I said, we'll be back next Friday, breaking down the schedule release. Michael, last thoughts.
So I guess some options for that, probably like Denver, some 2011 Tebow vibes. Pittsburgh maybe is an option for that.
No, I'm not that scared of. We're gonna have a whole schedule breakdown, but I don't want to get too into it. But I guess this is more of like a predictive thing. I would say like, what's a good team that they could play on prime time? Like the Bengals. I mean, hell, they beat them last year. I don't want to play the Bills in prime time. The Patriots would be good. Patriots would be good because they're probably viewed as a good team, but I know they're not maybe as talented as they used to be.
But, how about a Monday night Jets Dolphins game? That has some classic. That's what
I want a Monday night Jets Dolphins game home.
Rivalry has some more spice than the past few years, I would say.
I think the Thursday, they'll definitely get a Thursday night game. So I could definitely see the Thursday night game. I would prefer a Dolphins Monday Night Football game and maybe a Thursday night game against the Bears or something, but I know you want that good team. So I'm trying to think of like a good, it's like
Minnesota,
right,
maybe like Minnesota Thursday night game.
The Packers. Yeah, a lot of I don't want to get curb stomped on national TV. I guess I want to fit. Like I think the Colts last year. That's
the point of this game, to erase that mentality.
All right, that's true. All right, fine. Give us the Ravens.
You got to have that Sauce Gardner mentality. We're here to change the reputation. Doesn't matter what happened.
Okay, then out of all those, the best one would be the Packers because there's like the Saleh LaFleur storyline, the Rodgers Wilson story. You could probably Carl Lawson revenge game, as you said to me before the pod. So if you have to choose one of those teams, I guess give us Green Bay. And who knows, maybe Green Bay won't be as good as they were last year. You never know. All right, I guess Green Bay is the team for that game. All right, everybody, thank you for listening. I know we're still in shock from that draft class. Just fill your time watching Breece Hall highlights and dunking on nerds on Twitter who say it was a bad trade up. And we'll be back.
I'm not in that group, by the way. I'm with you guys. I'm also dunking on that.
Michael has put up the white flag. You don't need to bully him anymore. All right, everybody, have a great week. Go Jets.